The wind bit sharply against Daniel's cheeks as he trudged along Franklin Avenue, the threadbare edges of his jacket flapping with every gust. The city was alive with its usual chaos: honking cars, hurried footsteps, and voices rising over the din, but to Daniel, it all blended into a low, distant hum. At 16, he had learned how to weave through the noise unnoticed, invisible to the crowds that rushed past him. His stomach growled, a sharp reminder of how long it had been since his last meal. Yesterday morning, he'd managed to scavenge half a sandwich from a diner's trash bin, but it hadn't been enough. He jingled the coins in his pocket, barely enough for a bus ride, let alone a meal. Yet, despite the ache gnawing at his insides, Daniel pressed on. Somehow, he still believed that something better was out there. As he walked past a small park, the sunlight shifted, catching the corner of his eye. Daniel stopped. Beneath a bench, half hidden by a pile of fallen leaves, was a worn leather wallet. His breath hitched as he crouched down to pick it up. The wallet felt heavy in his hands, the leather soft but well used. Carefully, Daniel flipped it open. A neat stack of bills greeted him, more money than he had ever seen in one place. His heart quickened. Stuffed alongside the cash were sleek credit cards and a driver's license. The photo on the ID depicted a man with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair. The name printed below read Thomas Ashford. Daniel's fingers trembled as he stared at the wallet's contents. For a fleeting moment, he was tempted. The money could solve so many of his problems: warm meals, better shoes, maybe even a place to stay for a while. His mind flashed to the long nights he'd spent curled up on cold concrete, clutching his backpack like a shield. He could leave all that behind. But then, his mother's voice echoed in his mind. Do what's right, Daniel. No matter how hard it is, be the person you can be proud of. Daniel swallowed hard, his fingers closing the wallet. He wouldn't take it, not a single dollar. Honesty had been the foundation of everything his mother had taught him, and even though she was gone, he wouldn't betray her memory. Instead, he made a silent promise he would find Thomas Ashford and return the wallet. The address on the ID was in a part of the city Daniel had never been to. He stared at the street name Crestview Lane, printed neatly below the photo. It sounded like the kind of place where the houses had gates and lawns larger than the park benches he slept on. But Daniel was determined. He spent the afternoon asking strangers if they knew where Crestview Lane was. Most people ignored him, their faces buried in their phones or locked in hurried determination. A few muttered vague directions, but none offered any real help. By evening, Daniel's legs ached, and his empty stomach gnawed at him. He sat on the curb outside a convenience store, clutching the wallet like a lifeline. The money inside could have solved everything: his hunger, his exhaustion, but the thought of keeping it churned his stomach in an entirely different way. Hey, you okay, young man? Daniel looked up sharply. A woman in her 40s stood a few feet away, her expression warm with concern. Her curly hair framed a face marked by kindness, and the grocery bags in her hands made her look like someone with a life far removed from his own. Daniel hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But the woman's kind eyes reminded him of his mother's, and he felt a pang of longing he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. I found this wallet, he said quietly, pulling it from his jacket and holding it out. I'm trying to find the owner, but I don't know where this address is. The woman set her bags down and took the wallet, flipping through it quickly before handing it back. That's thoughtful of you, she said. Most people wouldn't bother returning something like this. Let me check the address for you. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. It's in Crestview. Oh, that's on the other side of the city. You'd need to take a bus or train to get there. Daniel's shoulders slumped. The coins in his pocket weren't enough for either. I don't have the fare, he admitted. The woman's brow furrowed, and then she smiled. Tell you what, she said, digging into her purse. She handed him a few neatly folded bills. This should cover it. It's the least I can do for someone as honest as you. Daniel stared at the money, stunned. I can't take this. Yes, you can, she said firmly. And you will. Think of it as my way of helping you do the right thing. For the first time all day, a wave of relief washed over him. He thanked her profusely, his voice trembling with gratitude, and hurried to the nearest bus stop. As the bus rumbled through the city, Daniel stared out the window at neighborhoods that grew wealthier with each passing mile. Crestview Lane was nothing like the parts of the city he knew. When he finally stepped off the bus, he found himself surrounded by sprawling estates with wrought iron gates and manicured lawns. He gripped the wallet tightly as he approached the address on the ID. The house was enormous, with large bay windows that glowed warmly in the twilight. A stone fountain gurgled softly in the driveway, its elegance foreign and intimidating. Daniel's nerves surged as he climbed the steps to the front door. What if they thought he was lying? What if they accused him of stealing? He shook off the doubts and rang the doorbell. The door swung open, and the man from the ID photo stood before him. Up close, Thomas Ashford's presence was even more commanding, but his expression was one of curiosity, not suspicion. "Can I help you?" Thomas asked, his tone polite. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat and held out the wallet. "I found this earlier today, sir. I believe it's yours." Thomas's eyebrows lifted in surprise. He took the wallet, opened it, and quickly checked its contents. "Everything's here," he murmured, his voice tinged with amazement. He looked up at Daniel, his eyes shining with gratitude. "I can't believe this. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me." Daniel felt a small smile tug at his lips. For the first time in months, he felt like he had done something truly meaningful. "Please come inside," Thomas said warmly. "I'd like to hear your story." As Daniel stepped through the grand doorway, the warmth of the home wrapped around him like a blanket. He had no idea that the decision he had made that morning would change his life forever. Inside the grand home, Daniel felt as though he had stepped into another world. The air smelled faintly of cedar and vanilla, and the soft hum of classical music played in the background. Elegant furniture, polished wood floors, and walls adorned with framed art all spoke of a life far removed from anything Daniel had known. He hesitated near the doorway, unsure if he should take another step. His scuffed sneakers seemed almost insulting to the pristine floor. Thomas noticed his hesitation and gestured toward a leather armchair in the living room. "Go ahead, sit down," he said warmly. "You're my guest now." Daniel nodded and sat carefully, still clutching his jacket tightly. He could feel Thomas's eyes on him, curious but not judgmental. "Can I get you something to drink? Water, tea, maybe some juice?" Thomas asked as he settled onto the couch across from Daniel. "Water would be great." "Thank you," Daniel replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Thomas disappeared into the kitchen and returned moments later with a glass of water and a plate of cookies. "Here, have one," he said, setting them on the coffee table. "You look like you could use a snack." Daniel hesitated, then took a cookie. The sweetness was a welcome reprieve from the empty ache in his stomach. "So," Thomas began after a moment, his tone gentle, "tell me how you came across the wallet." Daniel set the glass down carefully and recounted the events of the day, finding the wallet, his attempts to locate the address, and the kind woman who had given him bus fare. As he spoke, he tried to avoid revealing too much about his own situation, afraid of being judged. Thomas listened intently, nodding occasionally. When Daniel finished, Thomas smiled. "That's quite a journey you've had today. And through all of that, you didn't even consider keeping the money." "No, sir," Daniel said firmly. "It wasn't mine to take." Thomas studied him for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "That says a lot about your character, Daniel. Not many people would have gone to that much trouble to do the right thing, especially someone your age." Daniel felt his face flush under Thomas's praise. "It's just how I was raised," he said quietly. "My mom always told me to do the right thing, no matter what." Thomas's smile softened. "She sounds like a wise woman. Is she around?" Daniel hesitated, But something about Thomas's kind demeanor made him feel safe enough to share. She passed away last year, he admitted. It's just me now. Thomas's face fell. I'm sorry to hear that, Daniel. That must have been incredibly hard. Daniel nodded, staring at his hands. It was. She was the only family I had. After she was gone, I tried to keep things together, but it didn't work out. I couldn't pay the rent, and eventually I ended up on the streets. Thomas's brow furrowed, his gaze full of concern. You're homeless. Daniel nodded again, his voice barely audible. I've been living on the streets for a while now. I find places to sleep and get by the best I can. For a moment, Thomas said nothing. Then, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Daniel, that's no way for anyone to live, especially someone as young as you. I'd like to help you if you'll let me. Daniel blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Help me? Thomas smiled gently. For starters, I have a guest house in the backyard. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm, and it's empty. You can stay there as long as you need to. No strings attached. Daniel's mouth fell open. You'd really let me stay there? Why would you do that for me? Thomas leaned back, his expression thoughtful. You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. A good kid who just needed a break to turn things around. And besides, he added with a small chuckle, you returned my wallet. That's a pretty good sign that you're someone worth helping. Tears stung Daniel's eyes, and he blinked them away quickly. He wasn't used to people caring about him, let alone going out of their way to help. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Thomas said with a smile. Just let me show you the place. The guest house was a cozy one-bedroom cottage nestled at the edge of Thomas's sprawling yard. Inside, it was clean and neatly furnished, with a small kitchen, a bathroom, and a bed that far more inviting than the park benches Daniel had been sleeping on. This is all for me, Daniel asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. All yours, Thomas said. I'll make sure the fridge is stocked, and if you need anything else, just let me know. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, his chest tight with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. Thomas placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. You don't have to. Just focus on getting back on your feet. We'll figure out the rest as we go. That night, as Daniel lay in the soft bed, he stared at the ceiling, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions. Gratitude, relief, and a cautious hope all swirled inside him. For the first time in months, he felt safe. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around. And as he drifted off to sleep, he thought of his mother. He hoped she would be proud of him and of the choice he had made that day. The following morning, Daniel awoke to the soft light of dawn filtering through the curtains of the guest house. For a brief moment, he lay still, savoring the warmth of the bed and the unfamiliar feeling of safety. When he finally rose, he took his time washing up in the bathroom, marveling at the luxury of hot water. A knock on the door startled him. Daniel? It's Thomas. Are you up? Yes. Just a second, Daniel called out. He opened the door to find Thomas standing there with a tray of food, scrambled eggs, toast, and a steaming mug of coffee. Figured you might need a good breakfast, Thomas said with a grin. Daniel's stomach growled in response. Thank you, he said, accepting the tray. Eat up, Thomas said. When you're ready, come over to the main house. I want to talk to you about a few things. When Daniel finished eating and stepped into the main house, Thomas was seated at the dining table with a laptop and a stack of papers. He waved Daniel over and motioned for him to sit. Morning, Daniel. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in months, Daniel admitted. Good, Thomas said with a smile. Now, let's talk about your next steps. I've been thinking about how I can help you get back on your feet. Daniel shifted in his seat, unsure of what to expect. I don't want to be a burden, he said. You're not a burden, Thomas said firmly. This is about giving you the tools to build a better future. For starters, I think it's important you have some structure in your life. Work, education, and a sense of purpose. Daniel nodded slowly. That sounds good. But I don't know where to start. Thomas leaned back in his chair. I run a few businesses, and I think I can find a job for you. Something entry-level to start, so you can earn some income while learning valuable skills. You'd give me a job? Daniel asked, his eyes widening. Absolutely, Thomas replied. You've already shown you're hardworking and honest. That's exactly the kind of person I want on my team. Daniel couldn't suppress a small smile. I'd love to work for you. Great, Thomas said. I've spoken to Laura, one of my managers. She runs our logistics warehouse and is willing to take you on. She's tough but fair, and she's excited to have you. Daniel nodded, his nerves mingling with excitement. I'll do my best. I know you will, Thomas said. But before you start, we'll need to get you a few things: some clothes, work boots, and anything else you might need. Later that day, Thomas drove Daniel to a local shopping center. For Daniel, the experience was overwhelming. He wasn't used to walking into stores and being able to choose brand new items. Thomas guided him patiently, helping him pick out sturdy jeans, shirts, and a pair of boots that felt like they would last a lifetime. As they loaded the bags into the car, Thomas handed Daniel an envelope. What's this? Daniel asked. Open it, Thomas said with a smile. Inside were 50 crisp $100 bills. Daniel stared at the money, stunned. This is $5,000. I can't take this. Yes, you can, Thomas said firmly. And you will. This isn't a handout, it's an investment in your future. Use it wisely. Save it, handle emergencies, or get yourself something you really need. It's yours now. Tears pricked Daniel's eyes. He clutched the envelope tightly, his voice trembling. Thank you, Thomas. I'll make sure I don't waste this chance. Thomas rested a hand on Daniel's shoulder. I know you won't. The next morning, Daniel stood outside the guest house, dressed in his new work clothes, and feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. Thomas was waiting in the car, holding a travel mug of coffee for him. Ready for your first day? Thomas asked as Daniel climbed into the passenger seat. As ready as I'll ever be, Daniel replied, clutching the mug. You'll do great, Thomas said. Just be yourself, work hard, and don't be afraid to ask questions. They arrived at the logistics warehouse, a bustling hub of activity with forklifts whirring through aisles and workers chatting as they loaded trucks. Thomas led Daniel inside, where they were greeted by Laura, a tall woman with a no-nonsense air and a kind smile. So, you're Daniel, Laura said, shaking his hand firmly. Thomas has told me a lot about you. Yes, Ma, and Daniel said, trying to sound confident. I like that you call me Ma, Laura said with a chuckle. But you don't have to. Around here, we're all part of the same team. I'll show you the ropes and introduce you to the crew. For the rest of the day, Daniel worked alongside the warehouse team, learning how to check inventory, pack shipments, and organize deliveries. The tasks were physically demanding, but Daniel found the work satisfying. The camaraderie among the crew surprised him, and by the end of the day he felt a growing sense of belonging. When Thomas picked him up that evening, Daniel climbed into the car, exhausted but smiling. How'd it go? Thomas asked. It was hard. But I liked it, Daniel replied. Everyone was nice, and I think I did okay for my first day. You did better than okay, Thomas said. Laura called me during your shift to say you were a natural. Daniel felt a swell of pride. I'm going to keep working hard. I don't want to let anyone down. You won't, Thomas said confidently. That night, as Daniel sat in the guest house, he thought about the day. For the first time in months, he felt like he was moving forward. The work was tough, but it gave him purpose, and he was determined to make the most of this new opportunity. Over the next several weeks, Daniel threw himself into his new job with determination. The work at the logistics warehouse was physically demanding, but he found the repetitive tasks oddly therapeutic. Each day he arrived early, ready to tackle whatever was asked of him. Laura, the manager, quickly noticed his dedication. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Daniel," she said one afternoon as he finished organizing a shipment. "Keep this up, and you'll go far." "Thank you, Ma," Daniel replied, wiping sweat from his brow. Compliments like that were rare in his life, and he held on to them tightly. Daniel wasn't just working harder, he was learning. He picked up tips from his coworkers on how to handle inventory efficiently and how to operate the basic equipment. Some days were harder than others, especially when his muscles ached from lifting heavy boxes, or when an error in a shipment meant starting over. But every challenge made him more confident in his abilities. At the end of one particularly long shift, Laura pulled him aside. "I've been talking to Thomas," she said, folding her arms. "We agree it's time to teach you more advanced tasks. How do you feel about managing some of the schedules?" Daniel blinked in surprise. "Me? Are you sure I can handle that?" Laura smiled. "You've proven you can handle responsibility. I think you'll do just fine." Over the next few days, Daniel was introduced to the basics of scheduling shipments and coordinating the warehouse team. The tasks were more challenging than anything he had done before, but he embraced the opportunity to grow. By the end of the month, Daniel wasn't just another worker, he was a respected member of the team. At home, life in the guest house had started to feel like a blessing Daniel could barely believe was real. Thomas checked in on him regularly, often inviting him to dinner or simply stopping by to see how he was doing. Their conversations were becoming more personal, and Daniel found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. One evening, as they sat together in Thomas's living room, Thomas asked, "So Daniel, how are you feeling about everything? Work, the guest house, your future?" Daniel paused, his thoughts swirling. "Honestly, it's been amazing. I didn't think I'd ever get a chance like this. But sometimes I wonder if I'll mess it up." Thomas leaned forward, his expression serious. "You won't. You've got what it takes, Daniel, and even if you stumble, that's part of life. The important thing is that you keep moving forward." "I'll try," Daniel said, his voice steady with resolve. One Friday evening, after a long week at the warehouse, Daniel returned to the guest house to find an envelope waiting for him on the kitchen counter. Curious, he opened it to find a handwritten note from Thomas. "Daniel, you've come a long way, and I couldn't be prouder. This is a little something to show my appreciation for all your hard work and dedication. Use it wisely. Thomas." Inside were 20 crisp $100 bills. Daniel's breath caught as he counted the money. $2,000. He sat down at the small kitchen table, overwhelmed. It wasn't just the amount, it was the gesture itself. Thomas trusted him, believed in him, and was willing to support him in ways no one else ever had. Daniel made a silent promise to himself he would use the money wisely. He put most of it into the savings account Thomas had helped him set up, keeping only a small portion for necessities. The weeks passed quickly, and Daniel continued to thrive. With his new responsibilities at the warehouse, he felt more confident and capable than ever. His coworkers respected him, and Laura frequently praised his leadership potential. One day, as he worked through a particularly hectic schedule, Laura approached him with a smile. "You know, Daniel, you're a natural at this. Ever thought about moving up the ladder? I think you'd make a great assistant supervisor someday." Daniel was stunned. "Really? You think I could do that?" "Absolutely," Laura said. "You've got the work ethic and the smarts. Keep at it, and the sky's the limit." That evening, Daniel shared the news with Thomas over dinner. Thomas beamed with pride. "See, I told you you'd go far." "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Daniel said earnestly. Thomas shook his head. "You're the one putting in the work, Daniel. I just gave you a nudge. The rest is all you." That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he reflected on how far he had come. Just months ago, he had been wandering the streets, unsure if he would even survive the week. Now he had a steady job, a safe place to live, and a growing sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future, a real future. It was an unfamiliar but exhilarating feeling. And as he drifted off to sleep, he made another promise to himself: one day, he would pay this kindness forward. Months turned into a year, and Daniel's life transformed in ways he never thought possible. At the warehouse, he had earned the respect of his coworkers and the trust of Laura, who had officially promoted him to assistant supervisor. With his new role came additional responsibilities overseeing shipments, mentoring new hires, and ensuring the team ran smoothly. The work was challenging, but Daniel thrived on the sense of purpose it gave him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was just surviving, he was building something meaningful. One evening, after wrapping up a busy day at the warehouse, Daniel returned to the guest house to find Thomas waiting on the front steps. "Big day tomorrow," Thomas said, standing as Daniel approached. Daniel frowned, puzzled. "Tomorrow?" Thomas grinned. "Don't tell me you forgot it's your GED graduation ceremony." Daniel's face lit up. The past year had been a whirlwind of work and study. Balancing his job with evening GED classes hadn't been easy, but he had stuck with it, driven by the promise of a brighter future. "I didn't forget," Daniel said, smiling. "I just didn't think anyone else would care." Thomas rested a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Of course I care. This is a big milestone, Daniel, and I'm proud of you. I'll be there to cheer you on tomorrow." The ceremony was held in a modest auditorium filled with students from all walks of life. As Daniel walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he caught sight of Thomas in the crowd, clapping and beaming with pride. For a moment, Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He thought of his mother, who had always believed in him, and wished she could have seen this moment. But then he looked back at Thomas and realized that in some ways he wasn't alone anymore. After the ceremony, Thomas took Daniel out for dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant. Over plates of spaghetti and garlic bread, they talked about what was next. So Thomas began, leaning back in his chair. "What's the plan now? College? Trade school? Or do you want to keep climbing the ladder at the warehouse?" Daniel hesitated. For months, he had been focused on the present, getting through his classes, doing well at work. Now the idea of planning for the future felt both exciting and daunting. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I've been thinking about it. I like working at the warehouse and I've learned so much. But I want to keep growing, maybe even start my own business someday." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's a great goal. And you've got what it takes to make it happen. Just remember, whatever path you choose, you don't have to do it alone. I'll be here to help however I can." Daniel smiled. "You've already done so much for me, Thomas. I don't think I'd even be here without you." Thomas waved his hand dismissively. "All I did was give you an opportunity. You're the one who made the most of it." As the weeks passed, Daniel continued to excel in his role at the warehouse, but his ambitions grew. He started taking online business courses, eager to learn the skills he would need to one day start his own company. Thomas offered advice when needed, sharing insights from his years of experience as an entrepreneur. "Every successful business starts with a vision," Thomas told him one evening as they sat in the main house. "But the key is persistence. You've already shown you have that in spades." By the time the second year rolled around, Daniel had saved enough money to rent a small apartment of his own. Moving out of the guest house was bittersweet. He had come to think of it as a sanctuary, but it was also a milestone that filled him with pride. On the day he moved in, Thomas stopped by to help him unpack. As they finished setting up the last box, Thomas handed Daniel an envelope. "What's this?" Daniel asked, surprised. "Just a little something to get you started," Thomas said with a wink. Inside was a check for $5,000, along with a note. Daniel, this is not a handout. It's a vote of confidence in the incredible future I know you're going to build. Never stop believing in yourself. Thomas. Daniel's throat tightened as he read the note. He looked up at Thomas, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. You already have, Thomas said. By proving to yourself and to the world what you're capable of. Over time, Daniel's life continued to flourish. He completed his business courses and eventually launched a small delivery service that catered to local businesses. His reputation for honesty and hard work spread quickly, and the business grew steadily. But Daniel never forgot where he had come from or the man who had helped him when he needed it most. One day, as he stood outside his new office, he noticed a young boy sitting on the curb nearby. The boy's clothes were worn, and his eyes were filled with the same hopelessness Daniel had once known. Without hesitation, Daniel approached him. Hey, he said gently. You okay? The boy looked up, startled. Yeah, I'm fine, he mumbled, though his expression said otherwise. Daniel sat down beside him. You look like you could use some help. Come on, let's get you something to eat. As they walked together toward a nearby diner, Daniel felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he had ever known. He had promised himself he would pay the kindness forward, and now he finally had the chance to be someone else's Thomas Ashford.